let me just set up my screen. So before I get started, I want to apologize first for the sound. I feel like I'm screaming into it, but I know that it's not that loud. But anyway, today I'm going to be talking about women of color in feminism. So, to begin, I want to say that there seems to be a debate on if women of color really face specific discrimination because of their fact that they're people of color and women. I feel as though there are people who believe that yes, that they do face these issues, and then obviously there are some that say that no. I think that most of the people that say that they do face these problems are women of color themselves, simply because they face these problems themselves. And today we're going to speak about both of them. So I feel as though this is a two-sided debate. Those who disagree with the existence of the unique specific problems that women of color face for being both women of color, a woman and of color. And they want to just blanket this saying that, oh, we're all just speaking about unity. And then there are those who agree with the existence of the unique specific problems that women of color do face. The argument one, those who disagree with the existence of this unique specific problem. Is this a practical viewpoint? Yes. Why may this be? Because some do not believe that there is inequality between races, only inequality between sexes when it comes to the feminist movement. Additionally, feminists are fighting for women's rights, women being a variety of all women, not just a particular subgroup of women or women's. Argument 2, those that agree that there is an existence of the unique specific problems that women of color face. Is this a practical viewpoint? Yes. Why may this be? This viewpoint illustrates that to fix the inequality between sexes, we first need to fix the inequality between sexes, as sexes are a subgroup in feminism. Additionally, women of color are treated badly in other forms than their fellow non-women of color peers, not only because of their sex, but because of their race. It's a double prejudice. Why do these viewpoints disagree? Well, they disagree in the aspect that different subsets of women face different separate problems and equality, and because they disagree because whether or not addressing these issues will matter in the long run, because in the end goal is to find equality between women and men. So let's go into detail about both sides. So for argument one, with those who disagree with the existence of this specific or the unique specific problems, they are mainly come from women of color themselves actually feeling that they do feel a sense of equality in their work environment. Then there are those non-women of color who feel that they face prejudice as well, if not more than women of color, which also means that they also face prejudice because they're white. And the last one is that there are no unique problems that women of color face because at the end of the day, we're all suffering collectively by just being women. So, feeling equality within the work environment. This is a statistic that I pulled from Advancing Women, and it looks at different categories of minority women and their feelings in the work environment. So the first, Hispanic women, then Black women, and then Asian women, all said that they feel a sense of belonging within their work environment. And Hispanic women and Black women even say that they feel long-term career outlook in their work environment. So this kind of proves that, or this statistic proves that there are some women of color who feel good in their work environments. Feeling a discrimination towards Caucasian women and not just women of color. TERS states white people, some 55% of whom say whites are discriminated against in America. And a 2011 Harvard study states that white sees racism as a zero-sum game they are now losing. So this kind of begs the question as to why should we look at specifically minority problems when in reality it seems that white people face prejudice against being white as well. This is a case this is an example of what I was speaking about before, and it's Fisher versus the University of Texas. In 2008, Abigail Fisher was a white female student, and she did not get accepted into her dream university of the University of Texas. And she states, there were people in my class with lower grades who weren't in all the activities I was in, and they were being accepted into UT. And the only difference between us was the color of our skin. So in this case, it's actually a legal case between a non-woman of color fighting, saying that she's being discriminated against because, or against people of color or women of color. At the end of the day, feminists are fighting for women's rights, women being inclusive to all different varieties of women. According to a New York Times by Sheryl Sandberg, regardless of industry, a much lesser proportion of women share their opinions and raise their voices at work compared to men. This argument basically leads in to say that it's not just women of color, it's not non-women of color, or any women, it's just all women feeling that they can't raise their voice and speak when they are in a work environment with men. So we shouldn't look at women's problems or women of color's problems, because we're all suffering collectively as women at the end of the day. Now, for these arguments, I kind of personally don't see them as women of color's problems not existing, but simply that non-women of color or non-people of color not accepting or trying to not accept that these are problems and throwing blanket statements over them. Now, going into the second argument, those who agree that there is an existence of unique specific problems that women of color face for being both a woman and of color. Is this a practical viewpoint? Yes. Why? Well, there are women of color who feel discriminated against in the workforce. This may debunk my last claim, but I feel like I need to put it in just because I want to fight both sides equally. There are also women of color themselves who feel as though they face unique problems in a daily basis because of stereotyping. This kind of leads away from the whole school and workforce, but I think that this is important to add in just because these are very major problems regarding the way that you see yourself and your own well-being. And then that'll lead to the last point on the mental toil that women of color themselves say they face because of this discrimination. Inequality in the workforce. As stated by Jocelyn Fry, employers tout the steps that they have taken to respond to women's challenges in the workforce generally, and even less when it comes to race, ethnicity, and other factors. Now, this kind of shows that not only are women placed in second place because they are kind of taking away and trying to avoid women's challenges in the workforce, it almost seems that women of color are now even being placed in third place, because now addressing women's problems was one thing, but addressing women's problems within different subgroups is another, and that takes a lot of time away from them wanting to do their work or just simply address these problems. Another example could be, according to CNN Kaiser Family Foundation poll on race in America, 69% of blacks and 57% of Hispanics say past and present discrimination is a major reason for the problems facing people in their racial and ethnic group, as well as 26% of blacks and 15% of Hispanics saying that they felt they had been unfairly treated in their work environment because of their race or ethnicity. Now, going into stereotypes, again, like I said, this is kind of leaning away from the work school that I've been talking about before, but it's important because it leads into the mental toil of how these women of color face very specific and particular problems. Now, when it comes to stereotypes, it's really hard because it seems that depending on what race you are, you get put into a certain stereotype and then people make assumptions about you. So when it comes to black women, they are constantly labeled the angry black girl. So This basically describes them as being divas, angry, bitter, strong, just an aggressive, assertive personality trait. And then when it comes to Hispanic women, there's the feisty Latina stereotype, which is another very big problem because it shows that they're portrayed as very rational and fetishized. And then the last one for Asian women, they're categorized in, or some of them are very categorized in the submissive Asian girl. So they are hypersexualized and perceived as submissive. What are the consequences of these stereotypes? Well, the ill sense of belonging in their environments. This mainly comes because they feel like they have to not act, quote unquote, like their stereotype, because then that leads into the next um, point, that the feeling of not being taken seriously. If you kind of fit into the certain stereotype that you're placed into, nobody looks at you as a person anymore. They don't look at you as an individual, but they mainly just look at you as, oh, you fit in this stereotype, you are this type of person. And then that leads into the last point of the feeling of not being treated equally as non women of color because you fit in these stereotypes. And this leads into the next point, the feeling of shifting between two cultures, to not be placed into the category or the stereotype that people or that your race says that you need to be in. You constantly, or women of color constantly feel as though they have to jump in between who they really are and who they want to be perceived as in society. And this comes with a mental toil and well being. And I found a clip and I'm going to try and play it, but I don't know if it's. Women in leadership are vital for both our organizations and our communities. But if we don't have that voice, we've lost half the world. Dualism is shifting is when women of color have to look at being in two cultures and have to shift between the two to make others feel comfortable. And what happens in that particular environment is that you either feel isolated or diminished. So in my experience, I decided to go back and get my doctorate. So I think that that's kind of important because it shows that not only are you trying to make yourself feel comfortable within your own environment, but you're also trying to make other people feel comfortable by not fitting into these stereotypes and making assumptions and so on. I don't know if you guys heard it well. I'll link it next to my presentation. I don't know if you guys could read the captions. Anyway, I'm sorry. So, in conclusion, in my opinion, I think that in a way both of these arguments seem accurate and should be given attention. Um, the way that I see it is that going back to the non-women of color points, or the people that don't believe that women of color face certain inequalities within society, I think a lot of the arguments they make about we are all being discriminated and we're all fighting for everybody, this kind of blankets over the problems that women of color do face. In a couple of ways, it seems as though this is a mechanism to ignore the problems that women of color face and the discrimination that they face. And whether this be discrimination from non-women of color or just the lack of wanting to communicate about this, because this is a politically heated conversation, could be either or. And additionally, I feel that in a way stating that they do not exist is in a way not is not stating that they don't exist, but it's simply not accepting that they exist. And to conclude, I want to state that overall, I do not want to give or convey that women of color or non-women of color should be treated differently or separated. As a matter of fact, I mean the opposite. I'm actually pushing for equity instead of equality and helping come together and understand each other's problems and points of views. I think that the same way that some men don't understand women's problems is because not because they're bad people or they're ignorant. It's just because they've never walked a day in the life of a women, and in the same way or in the same respect, non-women of color have walked the way or the same steps in women of color shoes or women of color shoes. So I think my main goal is just to say that we should just put a little bit of that extra effort to understand each other. And it's my presentation. If you want to go through some stuff, here are my citations. Hey guys.